Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. There's something about getting out of town that resets your head. At least that's what I told myself when I packed the cooler, loaded the rods, and drove up toward the Red River Gorge for a 4-day solo fishing trip. Nothing fancy, just me, the woods, and the stillness of water. Exactly what I needed after months of burning both ends at work. Megan had encouraged me, even helped pack. Said I needed it. Said she'd take the weekend to catch up on reading, maybe visit her sister Abby. I didn't question it. We weren't exactly fighting, but lately there'd been space between us. Something unspoken. By the third day on the river, I felt human again. The kind of peace that only comes when your phone's out of signal range, and the only sound you hear are water against rock and wind through trees. I didn't even realize how much I'd been holding my breath until I let it all go out there. When I got back Monday morning, the first thing I noticed was that the mail hadn't been brought in. Megan never forgot the mail. Not even on Sundays, when she'd shuffle barefoot down the driveway just to check. I walked inside and the air smelled off. Not bad, just different. Like someone had used a lavender candle she never lit without a reason. Her slippers were by the back door, lined up neat. There was a wine glass in the sink, and the throw on the couch, the one she usually kept folded, was bunched up like someone had slept there. "Hey," I called. "You home?" No answer. I found her upstairs in the shower, steam curling out beneath the bathroom door. Her voice called out, casual, "Be out in a minute." I dropped my bag and wandered through the bedroom. Everything looked fine at first glance. But then I saw it. Her phone, left on the nightstand, screen lit up with a paused text message. I couldn't help it. It wasn't snooping. It was instinct. And what I saw wasn't explicit. Just strange. "So, you're really not going to say anything to him?" No name. Just that. Sitting there like a loaded question. She came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, smiling like nothing was wrong, acting like she hadn't just been texting someone about keeping secrets. "You're back early," she said, moving past me to dig into the dresser. "Caught everything I wanted to catch," I replied, watching her movements. "Good trip." I nodded. "Peaceful." She didn't ask anything else. No real interest in the fish, or the weather, or even me. And yet, she was unusually affectionate that night. Kissed me longer. Made my favorite pasta. Even laughed at my jokes, genuinely, or at least I thought so. But something about her felt controlled. Tuesday came and went. I worked from home, and she went out to lunch with Abby. When she got back, she seemed distant again, distracted. I asked how it went. "Fine," she said. "We talk about nonsense. You know Abby." She smiled, but there was tension at the edges. I asked nothing more, because suddenly I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. That night, I called Abby, under the pretense of asking about our upcoming barbecue. But when I brought up lunch, she hesitated for half a beat too long. Yeah, we had fun." "Megan, she's been kind of all over the place lately, huh?" "What do you mean?" "Oh, just, stressed. She said she needed space from things." "Things?" "Nothing bad. I mean, she didn't say anything." "Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that." We hung up not long after, and I sat there in the quiet living room, wondering what space from things meant. Wondering why Megan's laugh had seemed a little forced. Wondering who had texted her about keeping secrets, and why. And then, just as I was cleaning up dinner, I saw it. On the back porch. Megan's favorite hoodie, one I hadn't seen her wear in weeks. It was inside out, faintly dusted with what looked like sawdust. She hated dirt, hated mess, and I hadn't been working on any projects. I picked it up, turned it over, and tucked it under my arm. Something wasn't adding up, but I didn't say a word. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning felt like walking through fog. Megan was back to her usual self, breezy, cheerful, pouring coffee like we hadn't just been orbiting around something neither of us wanted to name. She talked about Abby's wedding planning struggles, the weather turning early this year, even how we needed to repaint the back porch. She didn't mention the hoodie I had folded neatly and left on the kitchen chair. Not a word. She simply placed it back in the laundry pile like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I decided to keep my head down and play along, but every small detail stood out like a flare in the dark. That evening, while Megan was out for her so-called book club, one I'd never heard of until last month, I started cleaning out the spare closet in the guest room, looking for old photo albums to distract myself. Instead, on the top shelf, tucked behind a stack of blankets, I found a small wrapped box, tied up with a blue ribbon. At first, I thought it might be for me. Our anniversary wasn't far off. Maybe I was being paranoid. But the moment I picked it up, I knew. The weight. The size. It didn't feel like the kind of thing Megan would ever get me. I unwrapped it carefully, heart pounding. Inside was a black leather wallet, expensive. Too expensive for us to be buying casually right now. Slipped inside the billfold was a note, barely visible. My throat tightened as I pulled it free. You'll need this for our little getaway. Can't wait. M. I stared at it. The letter M. That could be for Megan, but I'd never seen her sign anything like that. Not to me. Not to anyone. And why hide it? I rewrapped it exactly the way I found it, sealed it, and put it right back where it was. The rage settled over me slowly. Not a storm, but a fog. Thick. Suffocating. But I wasn't ready to burst yet. Instead, I went to the garage and found the old hunting knife Megan had gifted me years ago. I pressed it against the stitching of the wallet and carefully nicked a seam on the inside. Just enough so it wouldn't hold together when used. Not enough to make it obvious, just enough to ruin it eventually. I slipped the note back inside and put everything back like I had never seen it. When Megan got home that night, she was humming. She didn't notice me watching her as she floated through the house like everything was normal. She kissed me goodnight and curled up beside me like she had no worries in the world. I didn't sleep. I thought about that wallet, about the phrase, our little getaway. Whoever this was for, it wasn't me. I started paying closer attention after that. Subtle things. Her phone, always face down now. Her keys, always disappearing into her purse when they used to hang by the door. She kept checking her calendar, but never when I was looking directly at her. I noticed how she dressed when she went out, subtly nicer, even when she claimed it was just errands or meeting Abby. I didn't accuse her. Not yet. Instead, I played the fool. Thinking of taking you somewhere nice for our anniversary, I mentioned at dinner. Her eyes flickered just for a second. Then she smiled too quickly. Oh, honey, you don't have to do that. Let's keep it low-key this year. Low-key. That word stuck in my mind. Low-key like she wanted me distracted. Low-key like she needed space for something else. Over the next few days, I made excuses to be home more. I stopped by unannounced when she said she'd be running errands. And every time, there was something, an empty driveway, a half-packed overnight bag by the stairs, a whiff of cologne I didn't recognize clinging to the laundry. But it wasn't until Friday night that the knot in my stomach turned to something worse. Megan had gone to Abby's place, claiming they'd be working on decorations for the upcoming fair. I waited until late, pretending to be asleep on the couch. When she came home, past midnight, she smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. Megan hated cigarettes. I kept quiet. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I checked her purse. Buried beneath receipts and lipstick was a small folded paper, the stub of a motel receipt. Not a bar, not a restaurant, a motel, out near Highway 42, the kind of place that didn't ask too many questions. I put everything back exactly as I found it. That evening, I sat across from her at dinner, watching her laugh and talk like nothing was out of place. And maybe for her, nothing was. Not yet. But for me, the cracks were spreading. I knew now I wasn't dealing with some harmless flirtation or old friend. Someone was meeting my wife behind my back. I just hadn't figured out who. Yet, the next week passed like I was living in two realities at once. On the surface, Megan and I were the picture of small-town stability. We went to church on Sunday, hosted Abby for dinner Tuesday, and even walked together through the farmer's market on Friday like everything was just peachy. But underneath, I was a man unraveling thread by thread, quietly pulling apart the seams of what I thought was my life. I started doing what I swore I'd never do. Snooping. Nothing drastic. No password cracking. Just eyes open, ears sharp. Megan had been leaving early on Saturdays for what she claimed were yoga classes in Lexington, about an hour away. She had never mentioned yoga before. Ever. Now suddenly it was her refuge. That Saturday, I followed her. I kept a good distance, taking back roads to stay out of her rear view. Megan drove straight to Lexington, just like she said, but instead of the yoga studio she named, She pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe and met someone. Nate. Nate was Abby's fiancé. Younger, fresh-faced, and always respectful when he came around. The guy didn't seem like the cheating type, but there he was, sitting across from Megan, leaning forward, eyes wide, smiling. My stomach sank as I watched them through the diner window. They talked for almost 2 hours. No hugging, no touching, but the tension between them looked like more than casual conversation. I didn't barge in. I waited. Later that night, when Megan got home, humming like someone with a clear conscience, I could barely contain myself. "So," I said, "how was yoga?" She froze for a split second before recovering. "Good," she said, placing her bag by the door. "We did more stretching than usual." I tilted my head. "More stretching, huh? Or more chatting with Nate?" Her eyes widened. "What? Why would you say that? I saw you. At the cafe. Lexington." The blood drained from her face, and for the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely scared. "Tyler, no, it's not like that." "Then what is it, Megan?" I snapped, stepping closer. "Because it sure looked like you and Nate were getting real cozy." Tears welled up instantly. She shook her head frantically. "It's not an affair. He asked for advice. About Abby. He's been feeling overwhelmed with the wedding and work. He just needed someone to talk to." I stared at her, trying to read between the lines, but her voice trembled and the desperation looked real. "Why you?" "Because I've known Abby all her life. Because Nate didn't want to worry her. He asked me to keep it quiet." She sobbed. "I swear, Tyler, it's nothing like what you think." My fists clenched at my sides. Part of me wanted to believe her. The other part replayed every suspicious moment from the past 2 weeks like a highlight reel. But the more I pressed, the more the story held. Nate was young, a little naive, the kind who would confide in the older sister rather than burden his bride-to-be. I grilled her for another hour. Every detail matched. No contradictions. No slip-ups. Eventually, I sat back on the couch, staring into nothing. Was I losing it? Had I built up a storm in my head out of scraps? Nate had never given me a reason to doubt him. And yet, Megan collapsed next to me, hugging me tight. "Please," she whispered. "Please trust me." I nodded stiffly. "Yeah, okay." But deep down, nothing was settled. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to go back to those quiet nights on the porch swing. But something gnawed at me. Something fell off. It wasn't just the cafe. It was the motel receipt, the note, the wallet. They didn't connect. And Nate? He was too awkward, too nervous even around Abby, let alone capable of carrying on a secret with Megan. I kept thinking about the initials on the note. M. Everyone called Megan by her full name. No one called her M. No one except, I blinked, Cody. Cody was the bartender down at Mulligan's. Megan had mentioned him in passing weeks ago when I first returned from the fishing trip. I hadn't thought much of it. He was just a guy who poured drinks and listened to folks gripe about the weather and politics. But now I remembered the faint cigarette smell on Megan's jacket. Cody smoked. Everyone knew it. And he drove a black F-150. The same truck I saw parked near the motel the night. I followed her without knowing it was him. It hit me all at once like a freight train. I'd been shadowboxing with the wrong opponent. I sat there on the couch, Megan curled against me, tears drying, thinking she had smoothed everything over. And all I could think about was Cody's smug face behind that bar, serving up drinks and maybe something else. I said nothing, because now I wasn't going to just catch her. I was going to trap them both. For the next few days, I played the part perfectly, smiling when I was supposed to, helping Megan prepare for Abby's bridal shower, even cracking jokes like I wasn't unraveling inside. She, on the other hand, seemed relaxed, almost too relaxed, as if the cafe incident had been the last hurdle between us and marital bliss. I wasn't so easily fooled. Cody, the name haunted every quiet moment. Every time I saw Megan's phone flipped screen down, every time she ran errands, it pulsed in the back of my mind. I started testing the waters, casually asking about Cody when Megan mentioned Mulligan's during dinner. "Oh, he's sweet," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Kind of rough around the edges, but harmless." Harmless, right? That night, I sat up late scrolling through town Facebook pages, business listings, even Cody's own barely used profile. Nothing scandalous. just beer promos, the occasional bad fishing photo, and one post about some upcoming Weekend Blues event hosted at a motel bar. That motel bar. My jaw tightened. Megan had called it a book club night when she was supposedly there. The next evening, while Megan was upstairs folding laundry, I slipped out and drove past Mulligan's. Cody's truck was parked out back like usual, cigarette smoke curling from the open driver's window as he leaned against the door chatting with another local. Nothing suspicious about two guys sharing a smoke, until I saw it. Peeking from under the passenger seat was a familiar blue ribbon, the exact kind Megan had used to wrap that wallet. My stomach flipped. I couldn't be sure. Not yet. But I had enough doubt to keep digging. I returned home quietly, not wanting Megan to sense the shift. The next morning, Megan claimed Abby needed her help setting up for a family dinner. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but the moment she left, I drove straight to Abby's place. I knew her well enough to be sure she'd tell me if Megan was actually there. When Abby answered the door, confused to see me, I knew the answer before she said a word. "She's not here," Abby said. "Said you were working late?" I kept my voice steady. Plans must have changed. Abby tilted her head. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, elite. No worries." I left before she could pry further and headed straight back to town, this time parking across from Mulligan's with my binoculars tucked low on the dashboard like some amateur sleuth. Hours passed. Then just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, Megan's car rolled into the lot. She didn't go inside the bar. She circled around the back lot where the motel sat, casual, like she belonged there. I watched her disappear behind the office before stepping into one of the corner rooms. I waited chest tight. 15 minutes later, Cody's truck pulled up. I didn't need to see more. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. Megan breezed through breakfast, smiling about Abby's family dinner and how tired she was from all the decorating. She had no idea I'd been sitting in the dark the entire night, watching that motel room window glow faintly with lamplight, never seeing either of them leave until well past midnight. Later that day, while Megan was gardening, I slipped in her car and searched. Under the seat, tucked just out of view, was the receipt. Motel 6, room 214, Friday and Tuesday night. My hands trembled, not from heartbreak, but from resolve. Back in the house, I stared out the window as Megan worked in the flower beds. She wasn't stressed. She wasn't weighed down by guilt. She was content, confident. She thought she had me. What Megan didn't know was that I had already started laying my own trap, not with shouting or accusations, but with patience. I knew her patterns now. I knew her lies, and I knew her weakness, thinking I was too trusting, too passive to ever see through it. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I stopped by Mulligan's the next evening. Cody greeted me like any other patron, pouring me a bourbon without question. We made small talk. I pretended to care about the weather, the poor turnout for the weekend event. But when he mentioned Megan, casually, like she was just another customer, I saw it. The slight twitch, the half-second hesitation, the subtle panic behind the eyes of a man who knew he was cornered but wasn't sure if I knew it yet. "Good woman," Cody said, forcing a smile. "You're a lucky guy." "Yeah," I replied, letting the words sink deep. "I'm beginning to realize just how lucky I am." I tipped him and left, leaving Cody staring after me with that same hollow look I'd seen on deer right before the shot. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. And soon, Megan would know exactly how much I knew. The following days blurred together like some cruel joke. Megan kept up the act effortlessly, floating around the house, humming tunes while arranging wildflowers for Abby's upcoming shower. She made me breakfast, packed me lunches like we were newlyweds again, and I played along. Every word, every touch from her felt like a knife pressed gently against my skin. She thought she was winning, thought I was too blind, too soft to notice the cracks, but I wasn't blind anymore. I was staring straight through her. I kept my distance without raising alarms. I went fishing after work, stayed late at the hardware store, even volunteered to help a neighbor repair a busted fence just to keep Megan thinking I was distracted. All the while I was planning, watching. The motel receipt stayed folded in my wallet like a secret weapon, but I wasn't ready to pull it out yet. Not until I saw it all with my own eyes. On Thursday night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, Megan sipped her iced tea like she didn't have the weight of betrayal in her chest. She was telling me about Abby's bachelorette party, how it would be out at Logan's Lake, and how she'd probably need to borrow the truck for hauling decorations. I nodded, pretending I cared, pretending I hadn't seen her at the motel twice this week. That night, I went out under the excuse of picking up lumber from a late delivering supplier. I drove straight to Cody's place, parked down the block, and waited. His house was dark except for the faint glow of a porch light, but Megan's car wasn't there. I watched until midnight, feeling that same buzz of suspicion building into something sharper. Maybe she wasn't meeting him at his place anymore. Maybe they'd moved past the motel altogether. The next morning, I dug into the past few months. Old receipts, bank statements, gas station charges, anything that didn't line up. I found them all too easily. Fuel purchases near the motel. ATM withdrawals and cash. The missing hours all fit together now. It wasn't random. It wasn't casual. Megan and Cody had been careful, but not careful enough. The following evening, I caught the real break. Megan kissed me goodbye after dinner, claiming she and Abby were meeting up to do a trial run for the shower setup. I knew better. I let her drive off, waited 10 minutes, then followed, keeping far enough back to avoid notice. She didn't head toward Abby's. She headed straight for the woods, out past Logan's Lake, onto a back road barely wide enough for 2 cars. I killed my headlights and followed her up to the old quarry, a spot locals sometimes use for bonfires or sneaking off for late-night drinks. Her car parked near a rusted-out shed, and Cody's truck was already there. I watched from a distance as she stepped out, glanced around like she was expecting someone to tail her, then hurried toward Cody as he emerged from the trees. No hesitation, no shame, just 2 people meeting where they thought no one would ever look. They laughed, talked close. He pulled her into him, and she didn't pull away. I froze, watching them disappear behind a shed. The sickness in my gut wasn't from shock anymore. It was rage, yes, but controlled, focused. I'd been chasing shadows for weeks, but now I had it. Right there. No more speculation. No more half-truths. This was real. I waited another hour just to make sure. When they returned to their vehicles, Cody leaned in and kissed her like it was second nature. Megan didn't resist, didn't look guilty. She just kissed him back like this was the most normal thing in the world. When they finally drove off, I stayed. Sat in the silence of the woods, staring at that shed, staring at the empty space they left behind. I could have stormed home, could have flipped the whole thing upside down right then and there. But no, not yet. I needed to do this right. I needed to make sure Megan never saw it coming. When I got home, she was already asleep, or pretending to be. I laid next to her in the dark, listening to her breath, watching the faint rise and fall of her chest, wondering how much of what we built was ever real to her. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. Told me she and Abby made good progress, and she might have to do one more run tonight to finish up. Perfect. I agreed. Take the truck, I said with a calm I didn't even recognize in myself. Might make it easier. She grinned, thanked me, and kissed me on the cheek. I didn't flinch, because tonight wasn't just about catching her. It was about making sure when I did, she wouldn't even have the words to defend herself. By nightfall, Megan was all smiles, her overnight bag in hand, wearing the same navy windbreaker she always wore when she didn't want anyone to notice her. I pretended not to notice the subtle shift in her demeanor, how light her step seemed, how easy her goodbye was when she kissed me quickly and promised she wouldn't be too late. I nodded, handed her the keys to the truck, and wished her luck on the decorations. Then I watched her pull out of the driveway, like it was just another harmless Friday. I waited exactly 20 minutes before following. This time, I knew where to go. No guesses, no more hunches. I drove the long way out past Logan's Lake, sticking to back roads, cutting through the woods to avoid the main trail. The old quarry was quiet when I arrived. Cody's truck was already there, headlights off, parked halfway behind a rusted-out shed, just like before. I stayed hidden, watching from the ridge with binoculars, heart pounding, but steady. Then came Megan, pulling in like clockwork. She stepped out, checked her phone, then walked right into Cody's arms as he emerged from the shadows. There was no hesitation, no pretending. They didn't even bother whispering. Their voices carried through the trees, faint but clear enough. "I thought you might bail this time," Cody said. Megan laughed. "And miss our getaway?" "Not a chance." They walked together toward the shed, pulling open a side door I hadn't noticed before. Inside, I could see the faint glow of string lights, like they had their own little hideaway set up. I could barely make out blankets, a small cooler, and even a pair of wine glasses on a makeshift table. This wasn't just a spontaneous fling. This was planned, rehearsed. I felt the kind of cold I hadn't known before. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. It wasn't just betrayal. It was deliberate. Megan hadn't tripped into this. She built it. I crept closer, circling through the trees until I found a spot behind the shed where the boards were loose enough to peek through without being seen. From there, I watched as Cody poured wine, handed her a glass, and they toasted like they hadn't just ruined 2 lives. "We'll have to be careful with the photos," Megan said softly. "If Abby finds out, it'll destroy everything." Cody grinned. "Then let's make sure she never does." "Photos?" I froze. It wasn't just me Megan was lying to. It wasn't just about me. She was hiding this from her own sister, too. Abby had no clue. And, judging by the way Cody smirked, he wasn't just in this for fun. He knew exactly the kind of wedge he was driving between 2 families. They stayed there for hours. I didn't move. I watched every detail, every glance, every touch. I memorized it all. The only thing I didn't do was storm in. No yelling. No confrontation. Not yet. When they finally packed up and left, I stayed behind, taking pictures of the inside of the shed, the setup, the wine glasses, the initials scratched into the wood. M plus Seabold. Sloppy. Like teenagers. I walked back to my truck under the pale light of a rising moon, heart steady, mind sharper than it had been in weeks. The betrayal wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't even shocking. It was fact. Back home, Megan slipped into bed next to me as if nothing happened. As if she hadn't spent the night tangled up with Cody in a hidden shed like some dime store romance novel. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Just tired." I laid awake while she slept, replaying everything I saw, every word they said, every touch. There was no regret left in me. No begging for explanations. No need for her lies anymore. Because now I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to take everything. The house. The story. The trust. The one thing cheaters never expect to lose. Their control. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Megan slept soundly beside me, blissfully unaware that her little charade was about to collapse. I made breakfast like always, fried eggs, toast, black coffee, the usual. She smiled as she ate, chatting about Abby's bridal shower like nothing in the world could touch her. I nodded, played the part, even complimented the color scheme she showed me on her phone. Meanwhile, the plans running through my head were sharper than any knife in the kitchen. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Not in anger, but with precision. I gathered every piece of proof. I printed the motel receipts, the photos from the quarry, screenshots of bank withdrawals. I even went back to the shed to collect a few physical items. Wine corks, a handwritten note Cody had foolishly left tucked under one of the wine glasses with the words "can't wait for next time," scrawled on it. I didn't need to confront her. Not yet. This wasn't just about catching her. It was about showing her how far gone this all was. I reached out to Abby, casually mentioning I wanted to help with some final touches for the bridal shower. She was thrilled, naive, trusting. And why wouldn't she be? As far as she knew, her sister and I were still the perfect couple. I offered to host the final prep at our house, just the 3 of us before the big day. Megan didn't suspect a thing when I floated the idea to her. She smiled and agreed, maybe even relieved to play the doting wife again for appearance's sake. The night before the prep, I made sure Megan saw me leaving. "Going to the bar for a bit," I told her. "Need a drink." She waved me off without even looking up from her phone. She didn't even ask if I was okay. That told me everything I needed to know. But I didn't go to the bar. I went to see Abby. We sat at her kitchen table while I poured everything out. The photos, the receipts, the texts, the shed, the motel, all of it. At first, she didn't believe me. Tears welled in her eyes before a word left her mouth. "No," she whispered. "Megan wouldn't. She has," I said quietly. "And it's Cody. Abby staggered back like I had struck her. Cody? No, he's my friend. He wouldn't do that to me. I watched them, I said. I waited. I didn't want to believe it either. Abby sat there, trembling, wiping at her eyes. She promised she was helping me. She swore. She's been helping herself, I said coldly. Abby didn't argue. She just nodded, defeated. We stayed up half the night planning. It wasn't enough to expose Megan. We needed to show her exactly who she had betrayed. Not just me, not just her marriage, but the family that trusted her. The next day, everything moved like clockwork. Megan prepared snacks, fluffed pillows, and even put on the floral apron she always wore when trying to look like the perfect hostess. Abby arrived on time, bringing extra decorations and, most importantly, a flash drive I'd given her the night before. I let Megan lead the afternoon like it was her show. She talked about how much this day meant, how Abby's happiness was her priority, how she wanted this to be perfect. Then I plugged the flash drive into the TV. The photos filled the screen like wildfire. The shed, the motel, the notes, the carved initials. Megan turned white. Abby stood silently beside me, arms crossed, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her eyes hardened into steel. What is this? Megan stammered. You tell us, I said calmly. You've been rehearsing lies for weeks. She looked at Abby. I can explain. No. Abby snapped. You don't get to explain. I trusted you. Megan looked at me, but I didn't flinch. Abby continued. All those late nights, all those errands. You disgust me. Megan dropped to her knees. It was a mistake. Don't, I said sharply. Don't call it a mistake. You've been planning this, building this, and you thought I wouldn't find out. She sobbed. Tyler, please. I stepped back. Save it. You'll need your breath for when the whole town sees this. Her eyes shot up. What? Oh, you didn't think this was just for us, did you? I said, watching the horror flood her face. I'm done being quiet. You and Cody? Everyone will know. Megan collapsed, tears pouring, begging. No, please, don't do this, Tyler. I turned to Abby, ignoring the cries behind me. You ready for the barbecue tomorrow? I asked her. She nodded. Good, I said. I think it'll be unforgettable. The annual town barbecue was always a big deal in Millersfield. It wasn't just burgers and bluegrass. It was a social calendar anchor. Everyone came. Everyone gossiped. Everyone noticed when something fell off. This year, I intended for things to feel very, very off. Megan fussed nervously all morning, pacing the kitchen, checking and rechecking the potato salad she'd volunteered to bring, even though no one cared about the food this year. Not really. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to maintain composure, as if sheer willpower could undo the evidence Abby and I now held. She kept glancing at me, waiting for me to speak, to call the whole thing off, but I gave her nothing. Just silence. When we arrived at the park, the usual chaos was in full swing. Kids chasing each other, neighbors laughing, smoke from the grills curling into the clear blue sky. People smiled and waved at us like always, oblivious to the storm quietly brewing. Abby was already there, standing near the main pavilion with Cody at her side. He looked relaxed, even smug, like a man who hadn't realized yet that he was stepping into the worst day of his life. I watched as Megan stiffened the moment she spotted him, her eyes darting back to me, searching for some hint of what was about to happen. She found nothing. I just smiled politely and guided her toward the crowd. Then Abby stepped forward. Before anyone could make small talk, before anyone could ease into the day, Abby's voice cut through the noise. Clear. Sharp. Hey, everyone, she called. I'd like to make a quick announcement. Heads turned. Conversations died. Megan's eyes widened in horror as she realized the stage she thought was hers belonged to someone else. Abby continued. We all know this barbecue is about family, about love, about trust. Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied herself. And nothing says family like honesty. I stood next to her, arms crossed, as Cody shifted uncomfortably. Abby's eyes found Megan. That's why I want to thank my sister, Megan, for showing me exactly what betrayal looks like. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Megan staggered back a step, shaking her head. Abby, please don't, Megan choked. Abby raised a hand. Save it. She pulled out her phone and connected it to the small speaker system the town used for music. A few taps later, the slideshow began on the makeshift projector beside the pavilion. Photo after photo, projected clear as day. The motel, the shed, the initials, the embrace, the kiss. Silence hung like a curtain over the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is that Cody?" Cody's face turned beet red. "Abby, come on, this isn't you shut up," Abby said without even looking at him. Megan turned to me, tears streaking her face. "Tyler, please, we can fix this." I stepped forward, pulled a manila envelope from under my arm, and held it out to her. "Consider it well done," I said calmly. She blinked, confused, until she realized it was the divorce papers. I didn't stop there. "You'll find the terms generous," I added. "Considering you threw away your marriage, your sister, and whatever dignity you had left." The crowd didn't laugh. They didn't cheer. They just stared. Megan crumbled, clutching the papers to her chest like they were some physical wound. She tried to speak, but couldn't. Abby stood beside me, arms folded, unflinching. Cody muttered something under his breath and tried to slip away, but Abby caught him. "Don't," she said, voice cracking. "You're staying right here. Own it." I took a step back, letting it all unfold, watching the woman I had once built a life with flounder in the ruins of her own making. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just stood there, shattered, as the whispers swelled around her like a tidal wave. Later, as people avoided her like a storm cloud, Megan tried one last time. She caught me near the parking lot. "Tyler," she begged, breathless. "Please, we can start over. I'll do anything. I'll make it right." I stared at her, letting the silence weigh heavy between us. "No," I said simply. "You don't get to start over." Her lip trembled. "You don't mean that. I love you. You loved you," I said coldly. "I was just convenient." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "You can keep the apron," I added, nodding toward the ridiculous floral thing she'd worn to impress the neighbors. "I'm sure Cody will appreciate it." She collapsed onto the hood of a car, sobbing. I walked away, never once looking back. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.